2 classes ago we spoke about Sophocles, and I think I explained pretty well what his life and what his literary production entailed. Then we had a session dedicated to Euripides. Today I want to finish rounding up with Sophocles again, and at the end of the unit I'm going to give some time for you to bring up your comments and your highlights about the great work of Antigone, which I suppose by now you have all read. Very good. There are a few remarks I want to bring up regarding Sophocles. The first one, I mentioned that when we approach Greek tragedy, we should detach ourselves from that Western mindset, I would even dare to say that Hollywood mindset, in which we have the good guys, the bad guys, they fight, and we know that the good guys are gonna win. Here we see the contrast, the conflict between the polarity of 2 opposing values. And in Creon, we find that not everything is evil. In Antigone, at the same time, we find that not everything is good. So some scholars, and I agree with them, have seen this play as a call to moderation. So that's one first thing that we should bear in mind when we approach a Greek tragedy. We should not read them like the good ones against the bad ones, but about 2 opposing values. And by the way, that's also the way we should read the 4th book of the Aeneid. Right. Another thing which is also very important for us to know when we approach a tragedy is that for them, the Western concept of a spoiler didn't exist. For them, it was very clear. For them, the story was always very clear. The plot, they knew very well how the myth would go, right? And they knew very well what happened. Those were myths that were told over and over and over again. So they knew how things were gonna end. And really, for us, many times the spoiler thing is a suspension of disbelief. Does anybody doubt, does anybody question Aeneas is gonna get to Italy? We all know how things are gonna end, and we know that he's gonna win in his war against the local peoples, but we just want to continue reading on to see how things unfold, right? For us, that suspension of disbelief leads us to some deeper enjoyment of the work. But the Greeks already knew how things were going to end. They knew very well how things were going to end. And that is... So what was the point of it? It was not seeing how things ended, but how things unfolded. This was the main thing for the Greeks. And that is what made Sophocles so great, because he showed the progression and the unfolding and the process, and especially the intensity of the feelings with which people lived these events. That was his greatness. He showed how the events unfolded. I spoke a little about his works. Let me just deepen a little more into the 7 tragedies that are kept and that have survived to our days. The first one is Ajax, where is an early work, and we have an static I, meaning myself, I am static. And most of the plot unfolds surrounding that monologue in which the main character speaks to his inner self. You can call it his daimon, and it's a reflection about loneliness and how the main character and those crucial decisions that have to be made are made in complete loneliness. His wife Tecmessa and the curse can't help. Ajax is alone, and something very similar is what we see in his other great novel, his other great tragedy of 442, Deianira, which is a reflection about her loneliness and the resolution and the endeavor, and how human attempts often end up with the opposite outcome of what they intended to do. When it comes to his mature production, like Antigone and Oedipus the King, we find that the main character is still free. There's still that inner dialogue with his inner self, like we see in his earlier work, like we see in his earlier production. But now the gods play a more significant role, and you can see how this fate is determined. We maintain that loneliness when we read Oedipus the King, and also when we read Antigone. We see how she's alone. Not even Ismene, her sister, is there to be with her, to assist her. So we see the theme of loneliness. Let's highlight a few points about Oedipus the King. First, the theme of fate. So he was fated, he was doomed. Another very interesting reflection is the reflection about blindness. He mocks Tiresias, the soothsayer, because he's blind. But who sees clearly? It is Tiresias, the soothsayer, who sees things clearly, whereas he who is endowed with eyes cannot see. He cannot see how things are. He cannot see truth. He cannot see the reality. And what is the end? When he plucks out his eyes, when he is blinded, it is then when he can recognize the truth. So it's also tragedy about discovery of self, about self-knowledge. In general, we see that the main characters, the tragic heroes of Sophocles, are innocent, and they suffer from some kind of hamartia, the Greek word that we understand in the New Testament Greek like sin, but for them it was just an error, right? An error. We see it clearly in Deianira, we see it clearly in Ajax, and their error is not something that they devise with evil intent, but it's something that actually happens to them. You can see them as victims. However, not everyone agrees. And you could also read Oedipus the King as a punishment for the sins of Oedipus. What are his sins? Well, we know that he had married his mother and that he had killed his father. Definitely he didn't do that intentionally. But nonetheless, there are many excesses in his life. Right? Many excesses that to a Greek viewer would have seen completely inappropriate. The excess of disobeying the oracle, fleeing to Thebes, and what does he do when he enters Thebes? He murders a passerby who happens to be his own father. Without knowing it was his own father, but nonetheless, it's an excess. He murdered a passerby. And then he takes possession of the throne of the deceased king without ever avenging him. And he takes possession of the throne and of his wife, who happened to be his mother. He didn't know it was his mother. You can see he was innocent in that regard, but he doesn't avenge his predecessor. And he doesn't inquire into the death of his predecessor. That was also an excess. And then he falsely accuses and blames Creon of being plotting against him, like Creon wanted to take his throne. So he's accusing an innocent man. That's also an excess. And finally, maybe the worst of all his excesses, he mocks the soothsayer. He mocks Tiresias. He mocks the carrier of the divine will and the divine oracle. So as a consequence of all those excesses, Oedipus is punished. We're going to dedicate the rest of our unit to Antigone. Let me just highlight now something that Dr. Mercier mentioned in the previous session, that is the resemblance, the similarity between Antigone and Electra. He mentioned that, right? And just like Antigone has Ismene, Electra has Chrysothemis. So they both can confide in their respective sisters. They both are free. They both are female heroines. And in both of them, we see this freedom and this rebellion as an intent that ends up overcoming tyranny. However, Electra is a later work, and in the last works of Sophocles, we find the antithesis between myself and yourself. So it is no longer the unfolding of that conflict between my inner self and a fate, but here fate dwindles. Of course, fate is also present, but nonetheless is not as powerful or as omnipresent as it was in the previous tragedies. Now, the main conflict is that conflict between myself and yourself. And what's the etymology of Antigone? You can see also some resemblance with Electra if you look at the etymology. Well, the answer is no one knows. No one knows. But there are some theories, and I highlight these theories. First, how do you say ni? Goni gonatos. So Antigone is the one who refuses to kneel down, or the one who refuses to bend. Antigone, right? She doesn't want to bend, she doesn't want to bow, she doesn't want to subordinate. Another possible etymology is goneis, meaning parents, and in this particular regard, she opposes her own mother. The one who opposes her mother, right? And you can see that in Electra as well. So there's another common pattern that we see between Electra and Antigone. In Philoctetes, his drama, the drama he wrote in 409, we find hardly any divine intervention, only at the end, and it appears like a deus ex machina. And here we can see how close we are to Euripides, and how Euripides maybe had influenced Sophocles or vice versa, but we see that we are in a new stage. And finally, we know that Oedipus at Colonos was represented in 401 posthumously. It's the longest of his works, and you can also see in that farewell of Oedipus, Sophocles' own farewell. Like he's saying goodbye, and he no longer longs for glory. He doesn't want any high positions. He's just an old man who wants to find a place to rest. So you can see that Sophocles represents a lot of himself, especially in Oedipus the King, and I have already emphasized how the conflict with his own son is very well represented in the tragedy, right? His legacy. Dr. Mercier spoke about the Sophist movement, and definitely Sophocles is also a part of this time. However, he opposes that kind of rationalism and skepticism. You can say that Euripides comes a lot closer to that rationalism. Instead, in Sophocles, you still see some kind of intent to purify and moralize traditions and traditional religion, the respect for the divine oracles. So that is something in which Sophocles contrasts, and there's a conflict between Sophocles and his time. That respect and that reverence for the divine oracle is something very Sophoclean, and at the same time something that was not very popular within the sophistic school. there's also the value of law, the value of morals, and as part of his legacy, he also ends up giving 3 actors. And we spoke about this, right? The first one was Thespis of Icaria, and he is one actor that interacts with the chorus. Then we have 2 actors in Aeschylus. With Sophocles, we have the 3rd actor. And also the role of the chorus diminishes. In Aeschylus, we had like 35% of the lines were dedicated to the chorus. In Sophocles, only 22% are dedicated to the chorus. So we see that the chorus diminishes, although that doesn't mean that it dwindles in its importance, because he added more singers. With Aeschylus, we have only 12 singers for the chorus. With Sophocles, we have 15. His tragedies are also significantly longer, because if you take a random play by Aeschylus, you will see that in average they have like 1,000 lines, 1,000 verses. Instead, with Sophocles, we have in average 1,400 verses. The longest of them all being Oedipus at Colonus, with 1,779 verses. His characters are noble-hearted and not wicked, and they are, for the most, victims of their own hamartia. And before we finish, I just wanted to highlight some of the literary devices that Sophocles uses. His metrical pattern is the iambic pentameter. So an iambic pentameter is a short and a long, a short and a long, and a short and a long, and a short and a long, and a short and a long. That is 5 times. Short, long. So that's an iambic measure. You put 5 of those together, and you end up with an iambic pentameter. Okoino nauta delphonis meneskara. Arois hotit seustona poidi pukakon. Hopoio nuchinon etit sosaintelei. Udengaruta algeino nuta te sater. Utais chronuta timonest hopoio nu. Tonson tecamon ukopo pego kakon. So he knows how to measure very well, right? And then the response of his men is emoimen udeis mythos antigone philon. And here he falters. He didn't know how to count. You see, there's an extra beat. Did you see it? Did you perceive it? Emoimen udeis mythos Antigone. So he doesn't know how to fit Antigone there. But okay, he's a great playwright, so we spare him, right? We'll be lenient with him, even if he didn't know how to count in this line. And then you keep reading a few lines ahead. And between the 2 brothers, right? So it is Antigone who's saying what happened with Eteocles. And here Sophocles again doesn't know how to count. And he says, Eteoclea menhos legus in sin duques. So he's adding an extra beat. Duques, then Chresei dikaya kainomu katachzonos. Okay, perfect. He knew how to measure that. Eclipse tois ener thenen timon necrois. Tondathlios tanonta polineikus nekin. Again, he didn't know how to count. So there are too many errors, right? He didn't know how to count well. There are too many mistakes, right? Or did he want to emphasize all those names? Antigone, Eteocles, Polynices. Right, of course he wanted to emphasize that. He knew how to count very well. These are no mistakes. He's just emphasizing. And then a little farther ahead, Toyauta facinton agathon creonta soy. So here he is emphasizing the word agathon, creonta. Why? Because of the irony. Of course, Creon is not good. Antigone is speaking about Creon and calling him agathon creonta. And adding that extra syllable, he emphasizes the irony. So Sophocles knew how to, he was very masterful in his usage of this iambic pentameter. And when he breaks this pattern, you should always see why. What is he trying to emphasize? What is he trying to emphasize? Notice this other thing, ambiguities. Ambiguities. Of course, that's very challenging for a translator. But if you just read it in Greek and you don't translate it, you find some things that are wonderful. And it can be challenging for someone who's trying to translate because you have to make an option, you have to make a choice. So how am I going to translate this? But when you just follow the Greek, these ambiguities become very enjoyable and you can see how great of a poet he was. Let me see if I find this one, for example. Exactly. Yes, I found it. It's verse, it's line around line 45. And Egar noes taptein porreton polei. So Ismene asks him, and she doesn't want to understand that Antigone means, and she intends to bury her deceased brother. So Ismene says, Egar noes, are you thinking? Thaptein, to bury him. Do you think, are you thinking you're going to bury him? Porreton polei, aporreton, ambiguity. That can mean secretly, or it can mean forbidden. So, is it forbidden for the city, or is she planning on doing that secretly, or both things? And her response is impressive. Antigone replies, ton gunemon kaiton son en theleis. So she corrects Ismene. And she says, it is not auton, it is not he, it is not a random guy, it's not some spha in Greek. It is ton gun emon kaiton son ensyme theles adelphon. He's my brother, and he's your brother. And here we have a parenthesis, ensyme theles, even if you don't want. Even if you don't want. Even if you don't want what? I will bury him even if you don't want. Option A. Option B. He is my brother even if you don't want. He's your brother even if you don't want. Ugarde produsa alosomai. And I will not be convicted for betraying him. You can charge me with many things, but not with betraying my own brother. Ensyme theles, even if you don't want. So, as a translator, I would have to place this ensyme theles, even if you don't want, I would have to place it somewhere. And that would add a particular meaning, either to what is forbidden, and Antigone is about to do, about this brotherhood between Antigone and her brother, or between Ismene and her brother, or about her action that she's going to fulfill, even if Ismene doesn't want. Another thing that catches my attention here, as we were seeing, these lines convey an idea. And Sophocles is a great poet, so in every line he conveys a full idea. Right? That's clear. Now, sometimes he breaks this metrical pattern. And in this very line, ton gunemon son kai ton mes theles, son what? So we have an adjective that is not ended. What is this adjective referring to? And only in the second line do we find the adelphon, referring to the brother. Why? I call it like a sigh. So now the flow of the verse is interrupted. And I continue with the flow of the verse, but I'm not finishing my sentence because I have to breathe. I have to make a pause. I take a sigh. Ton gunemon kaiton son ensyme theles adelphon. So this word is being remarked Do you see it? Let me give you just another example before we finish. Yes, it's verse like 466. Actually, all from verse 450 is filled with these literary devices that are called in French, well, in English, enjambment. Of course, it's a French word, which means when a verse doesn't finish the idea and it only finishes in the next. Ugar timoitseusen hokerik sastade. A complete line, a complete idea. Ude sinoikoston katon deon dike. A complete line, a complete idea. To use the anthropoisin orisan nomus. A complete line, a complete idea. Udestenein to suton o mentasa. And he doesn't complete now. Kerigma hosta grapta kasfaletheon. And it's incomplete. Nomimad dinasta ithneton non hyperdramain. Oh, this is. I said it was gonna be the last thing, but something just popped into my mind, and I'm noticing right here. First, he doesn't complete these ideas, and he's adding some suspense. I didn't think your decrees were righteous, and there are still other what? And she doesn't say what. Theon, other things of the gods, but she doesn't say what are those things, only until the next line, nomima, decrees. So there are your decrees, which are human decrees, and there are those agrapta, kasphale, theon, she breaks the line, nomima, those decrees that are agrapta, which are not written, and asphale, and they are firm. Dynastait phneton on hyperdramain. And you, being a mortal, you cannot hyperdramain. A translator would take that hyperdramain like to transgress. The interesting thing here is that Creon just asked her, Tus diperbanein nomus, how did you dare to transgress these laws? So we have the word transgress twice. Creon is asking her how could she dare to transgress these laws. You see it? And she responds, you are a mortal and you cannot transgress these laws. The difference is that while Creon is saying hyperbainein, and you know the meaning of the word bainein, to go, so you overstep. She responds hyperdramain. What is dramain? Trachein, to run. So if I overstepped, you all the way ran into that transgression. Ugartinin kechses alaipote zetauta kudeis oiden exotufane. And this verse is borrowed by the International Theological Commission in a document that was issued in 2007, I think, about natural law. So they are referring to this text, saying that there are laws that are not written. Zetauta kudeis uden exodufane, tuton ego dukem melon andros udenos, phronemat deisas en theos tendiken dosein, thanumene garexoden tidu. I knew I was gonna die, so what? Finishes the line. Que mesi prokerixas, even if you didn't announce it, and that is very clear because it was the law. It was not only a decree of Creon, it was the law. Eide tu chronu, tus dethanumai, kerdos autegoleo. And if I die before my time, I call this a blessing. Hostisgar en poloisin hos ego kakois, whoever lives in many evils, but the se only comes in the next line. Whoever in so many evils gasps, lives. Post do uchi cat thanon kerdos ferei. How will he not gain a reward by dying? He finishes the line here. Sophocles or Antigone, whoever you want to see, finishes the line. Hutos emoigetus de tu moruti hein paruden algos. And this happens to me as a fate. Paruden algos, without any pain. Al an eiton ex emes, but if that of my own, what? Suspense. Al an eiton ex emes, and Sophocles doesn't finish the line. Where he's creating tension, and now I'm creating tension because I'm not telling you what. Metros. Thanon tathapton ens homen nekin. So if I were to bear the burden of an unburied brother, son of my own mother, it's almost as if she dreads to utter the word. So these literary devices, of course, are marvelous, and I'm just highlighting a few. The whole work of Sophocles is full of these ambiguities and these literary remarks, and I hope you got to enjoy this. Okay, thank you.